My name is Günther Sandner. I'm a political scientist and historian. I work at the Institute Vienna Circle at the University of Vienna, which is a research institute, and I work as a senior scientist there. But I also teach at the University of Vienna, and I also teach extramural outside the university in adult education. My project at the Research Centre Global Disconnect, called Following Isotype: Visual Languages and Universal Symbols After 1945. So why following isotype? Isotype was a method in visual education that was created in Vienna in the mid-1920s. Its name in that time was Vienna Method of Pictorial Statistics, but it was renamed into Isotype in the 1930s. Isotype stands for International System of Typographic Picture Education. The idea was to address less privileged people, especially the working class, to empower the working class politically. It worked with so-called speaking signs. That means you recognize a symbol by looking at it. For instance, the figure of a man with a worker's cap and hands in his pockets represents an unemployed man. For instance, 3 symbols represent 3,000 unemployed. So it's very easy to compare social and economic relations. That was the idea of Isotype, but my project starts later. It starts after the end of World War II and after the end of fascism and National Socialism. And I compare 3 different approaches. The one is Marie Neurath, who followed the isotype approach in England for many decades. The second one is Rudolf Maudsley, who collaborated with Margaret Mead, the famous American anthropologist. They created a universal visual language called glyphs, or at least they tried to develop. And the third one is Charles Bliss, who was never part of the isotype team, but knew this tradition quite well and developed his own approach, which called semantography. That was the title of a book he wrote in 1949, or Bliss symbolics, as it was also called. And these 3 approaches were in close dialogue with each other, especially in the 1950s and 1960s. But this collaboration never came to a fruitful end, I would say. There was much dispute, there was much struggle between these people and their organizations, between Marie Neurath in England, Maudsley and Mead in America, and Bliss in Australia. And the idea of creating a universal language, which means there's only one universal language, failed because they never agreed for a single universal language. I think my project is closely connected to the idea of disconnectivity. In the decades after 1945, the idea of a universal language, of creating universal languages, became more important for different reasons. One reason was the idea of peace, because the protagonists of universal languages always thought that the establishment of a universal language, universal picture language, could create peace, could create a peaceful world order. But there were also other developments in these decades. For instance, the international trade, the expansion of international trade, international business travels, tourism, etc. So universal languages was a very important phenomenon. And what universal languages wanted to do is to build bridges to transcend this connectivity, to transcend the barriers between different nations, different languages, different cultures. This was one of the central aims of universal languages. But as we have seen, the idea in the end failed. They never materialized in a way. But I think the idea of universal languages is also connected to a term that is part of the discourse on this connectivity. And this is the term active absence. absences, because I think that universal languages represent active absences. They were always discussed, they were always there as an idea, but they never became reality. So I think this is a very good example for active absences in the context of disconnectivity.